All right, hey everybody. It's Dr. Sean Talbot. Welcome to the Wellness Wednesday call tonight. Just give me 1 second while I get my slides up and running. I'm going to put the chat up here like we do on these webinars. If you would put your questions in the chat as we go through, and I'll stop periodically and look in there and see if there's any questions that need answering. This is a great way for you to get your questions answered live while we're talking about what we're talking about tonight. We're going to talk about aging, which is going to be a fun seminar, I think. So let me find this guy and beautiful. Let me switch my displays real quick. Okay, that should be a better view for you guys. All right, so tonight we're going to talk about aging. And we're going to talk about it in a context that is called successful aging, which I'll unpack a little bit more as we get through. So we're going to talk about the aging process. We're going to talk about how your gut is involved in the aging process, and we're going to talk about some of the things that you can do to slow that process to really, make sure that you're not aging in an accelerated fashion. Okay, so we're going to go through the science, and at the end, we're going to have some very practical tips that anybody can follow to keep their gut young. And by doing so, keep the whole organism young. That's going to be the theme of what we're talking about tonight. So, this is the third class in this overall Life Stages Masterclass. So, Life Stages Masterclass 3 of 3. What is successful aging versus the opposite of successful aging is unsuccessful aging, which is what we also call frailty. You definitely don't want to be frail. And in aging research, frailty or being frail is a particular set of badness situation, right? You probably don't have good muscle mass, something called sarcopenia. You probably don't have good bone mass, something called osteopenia or osteoporosis. You might have cognitive impairments, right? So, not necessarily Alzheimer's, but dementia and neurological dysfunction, and all of that gets traced back to what's happening in the gut and specifically with the microbiome. So we're going to talk about how gut health, nutrition, and daily habits influence energy, cognition, and long-term health. And if you have energy, cognition, and long-term health, that's successful aging. So we're going to talk about all of that tonight. So just to remind people, the first in this series was about pregnancy. The second in the series was about menopause, and I've got a couple of summary slides that you can see here. So if you didn't catch those when we did it live, those are posted up, and you can watch the replays of those. I always show this slide at the beginning of one of these master classes, just so people know where I'm coming from. I'm trained in nutritional biochemistry and exercise physiology. So a lot of what I talk about when I talk about mood state, when I talk about psychology, when I talk about behavior, when I talk about lifestyle, when I talk about how we're feeling, how we're performing, I always try to bring it back to the biochemistry. I say very often, I'll probably say it, during tonight's masterclass at some point, that biochemistry drives behavior. The idea that if we can change your biochemistry naturally so that you have the right level of serotonin, you're going to be happier. If we can change your biochemistry so you have the right level of dopamine, you're going to be more motivated. And the right level of short chain fatty acids and the right inflammatory compounds and et cetera, and et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of what we talk about in these master classes is what's going on under the hood. Because if we can understand that, if we can understand the biochemistry, then we can modulate that biochemistry. If it's out of balance, we can put it back into balance. If it needs some amplification, we can do that amplification. And in doing so, help to improve your mental fitness, help to improve your physical performance, help to improve how you show up in the world. Okay. And so if you like this kind of stuff, you can find lots of free resources at doctalbot.com. That's where I have a lot of my educational programs. This Three Waves B&B is where we run our retreats. And we run it like a B&B, like a bed and breakfast. People come here and learn how to eat and learn how to sleep sleep and, learn how their gut-brain axis operates and things like that. And then threewaveswellness.com is where we have some of our science-based nutraceuticals. So there's all the rest of the stuff. I'm not going to go through all those bullet points. You can look at my background if you want to. So I am just back from the Sports and Active Nutrition Summit about a week ago in San Diego, where my new company, Three Waves, was named a startup star, right? Basically, startup of the year. We got to go there and have a booth and give some presentations and be sort of they gave us a trophy and we get to stand on stage and take some pictures and stuff like that, which was really cool. We are the holistic mental wellness company. We are helping people to feel their best by changing their biochemistry, like I just explained, because that's the source of, if we can get that in balance, we can solve problems like this. We can solve burnout and fatigue and anxiety and sleep problems, et cetera, because we're rebalancing the entire gut immune brain axis. And so, over the course of, the last little bit, we have established the world's first mental wellness retreat. That's the B&B that I just mentioned. We have certified over 1,000 mental wellness coaches out there in the world who are helping us spread this message about the importance of the gut immune brain axis. And we're going to have some exciting announcements coming up about that program. And we've launched some science-based nutraceuticals that you can find at threewaveswellness.com, and an affiliate program. So if this is something that you're really into, you might want to become a mental wellness coach. You might want to build a business around becoming a mental wellness coach. You might want to represent those products and make a commission by sharing the products with people. Or you might just want to be a customer and use the products for yourself, whether it's Zenith, which is our award-winning product that is a patented formula that includes all the biotics, probiotics, prebiotics, postbiotics, phytobiotics, geared towards helping people with their overall resilience, their ability to sort of show up in a stressful situation and perform. Okay, so that's all I'll say about those. You can find out all the information about them if you're interested. I want to mention this. So we do a lot of these calls. On all kinds of different topics. Sometimes it's about the microbiome, sometimes it's about the gut-brain axis, sometimes it's about different neurochemicals. It might be about stress hormones like cortisol. It might be about GABA, which is your body's primary relaxing neurotransmitter. It might be about peptides. I'll actually talk about peptides a little bit tonight because they're all the rage in the anti-aging world. We've done a whole masterclass about the hype around peptides. What's real, what's not real, if you're using them, how to amplify their benefits, if you're afraid of them, how you should approach them, so there's a whole masterclass about peptides if you want to dig into that kind of stuff. And a lot of that information you can find at these websites. Some of them are on my YouTube page. If you're interested in getting alerted to what all these Wellness Wednesday topics are and where you can see them live and where you can see the replays, you can go to this link on doctalbot.com/Wellness Wednesday. If you want to get information about supplements that you can use to help with your stress or your mental focus or your ability to be in a good mood and be mentally focused and things like that, you can go here, doctalbot.com, level up, and you can download this free ebook. This is drawn from a bunch of my writings, and it's all about nootropics, which are brain boosters, and adaptogens, which are herbs that help you adapt to stress, and psychobiotics, which are things that work in the gut to help change your psychology in a positive direction. Ancient remedies for modern performance. You can go and download that and get a good deep dive into some of the natural remedies that are out there. And then you can also take a mental fitness quiz at this link, doctalbot.com/quiz. Free quiz. Takes about 5 minutes to fill out. It's based on some of the leading scientifically validated psychological surveys that are out there, and we've put them all together with a pretty cool algorithm, so you can get some really good information about where you stand right now and where your weak spots are. What is it about your psychological makeup that you're doing well in? What's strong, and then what's weak? And the benefit of that is that you can say, oh, this is maybe what I need to work on. Instead of trying to work on everything, you can focus in on where you're where your weak point is, and you can work on that. And then you can come back and take the quiz later on and see how you've improved. Okay, so real quick takeaways from the master class that we did. Number one, this was the one on pregnancy. So I'm actually gonna go through all these bullet points. I'm not gonna read all of them because there's only one or maybe two that I wanna show you, which is uh, all of these. As mom goes through her 3 trimesters of pregnancy, her microbiome is naturally changing, and it's naturally changing in a bad direction. So, from the mom's perspective, the microbiome is getting less and less diverse every month of her pregnancy, and it's by design so that mom can deliver a low diversity microbiome to the baby, and then that low diversity or immature microbiome meets an immature immune system in that baby, and they develop together, right? That's what we would love to see. That's good for the baby to develop that way. It's good for the mom during the course of those 9 months, but mom needs to bounce her microbiome back to a high diversity microbiome. A high diversity microbiome is generally associated with better mood, better resilience, better immune system function, better everything, better aging, successful aging, as we're going to talk about tonight. So if mom doesn't bounce back her microbiome to a high diversity microbiome, she's more at risk for things like postpartum depression, postpartum anxiety, holding on to the baby weight and not being able to lose that weight, just not in a good place biochemically. Okay, so that's the first thing. Microbiome changes over the course of the mom's pregnancy, and it needs to change back so that mom can, get back to her, to her A game. Okay. When we talk about menopause, or the male version of that, andropause, the microbiome changes during that time of life too. So let me move this picture out of the way so that we can go through each one of these. And again, I'm not going to go through each one in detail, right? Those deep dive master classes are out there if you want to get all the details. But the microbiome changes over the course of this stage of life as well. And there are things that we can do to maintain that microbiome balance so that we can maintain estrogen levels in women, and in doing so, reduce hot flashes and night sweats and vasomotor symptoms and things like that. And same thing for men, maintain testosterone levels because of what's happening at the level of the microbiome. So your estrogen levels drop as a female, your testosterone levels drop as a male, and we can harness the power of the microbiome to make sure that those hormone levels stay at a more youthful level. So that's something that we can do. And if you'll notice, one of the bullet points that was on this one and that was on the pregnancy one is having a diverse diet. If you can see my cursor right here, diverse diet. I recommend the 3 F's: fiber, fermented foods, and flavonoids. We're going to come back to this at the end of tonight's presentation to talk about the key things you can do to help to maintain your microbiome in a more sort of youthful state. So this can help during pregnancy, this can help during menopause and andropause, this can help during the aging process. Okay, there's also a whole bunch of herbs that we can use to help maintain hormone balance, a lot of which that I write about in my upcoming book, Wild Medicine. So this is written, it's submitted to the publisher. It's probably not going to come out until the end of this year, the beginning of next year. But you can actually go on Amazon and pre-order it now, which would be very helpful. Okay, so that's where we are right now. Microbiome changes during pregnancy, microbiome changes during andropause, menopause, perimenopause, and now we're going to talk about how it changes over the rest of your aging process. So let me look up here. Let me look up here real quick, and see if looks like okay. Hopefully we're doing okay. Just a couple of comments in there. All right. So uh, as we age, we have a different microbiome when we're a baby, when we're a teenager, when we're an adult. It generally stays fairly stable as an adult. There's things we can do to modulate it, right? Some of the things that I mentioned before, right? We can get your microbiome to make more neurotransmitters to help us be happier, or make more short chain fatty acids to help our metabolism, our blood sugar control, and our appetite, and things like that. We can harness our microbiome to change our hormone exposure, like during menopause and andropause. But unless we uh, have a big insult, like we go on antibiotics is going to be a big deal. Going on any prescription medication actually can very much damage your microbiome. Eating a diet that's high in processed food, becoming very sedentary. Because exercise is very closely linked to having a good microbiome. Being under a lot of stress, having poor sleep hygiene. I just basically described a modern life. A modern life can very much cause your microbiome to age in an accelerated fashion. From the time that we are, fully grown adults, let's say 25, just for the sake of discussion, to when we become elderly, and let's just say 65, and you'll see why I use that number in just a second. During those 40 or so years, your microbiome should be relatively stable unless you have any of the exposures that I just mentioned. One of the things that we know from aging research that tells us that the microbiome is very closely aligned with the aging process is looking at the difference between, a population of older people and a population of very old people. A centenarian is somebody who is 100 years or older, or a super centenarian is somebody who's 110 years or older. And the big feature that we see here, what is it about a super old and healthy centenarian compared to a less old and maybe not healthy, just regular old person, is that the centenarian has a microbiome that looks like a much younger person. So something about their microbiome has been able to maintain that youthful framework. I'll give you a perspective for like exactly what that means in just a second. But that seems to be a really important signal of successful aging, that you can maintain that youthful microbiome so it doesn't drop in diversity. When your microbiome starts to drop in diversity, it ends up becoming more inflammatory. It ends up becoming problematic for your immune system. It becomes problematic for your neurotransmitter production, problematic for your hormone maintenance, problematic for all the things that we just talked about. So, the sort of moral of this whole story is if we can keep the microbiome from dropping in diversity, if we can maintain its youthful structure and therefore its youthful function, we can keep the entire organism young, right? Nobody cares about young bacteria, but there's something about those young bacteria that keep the whole rest of the organism younger. And I'll do that in quotes on perfect. Younger. How are we measuring youth versus being aged? You'll see how that sort of develops as we go through the slides tonight. Okay, so sometimes people call this anti-aging, and I don't really like that term. It's not anti-aging, it's successful aging, right? It's not that aging is a bad thing. We actually, aging can be a good thing, like, wisdom and experience and, life lessons and all that kind of stuff. I don't think we should look at aging as a bad thing necessarily, but I like to frame it like this, how I started, successful aging versus frailty. We don't have to become frail as we age. We can age in a very productive way. And one of the things that I think is funny about it is that um, in the anti-aging world, sometimes it's framed as if, you don't want to age because you don't want to develop a disease, or you don't want to develop Alzheimer's, or you don't want to develop cancer, or you don't want to, and so they show pictures of, these, healthy looking, happy, walking on the beach, dancing in the park, that kind of stuff. That's not the kind of aging that I want, right? I'm going to be, what am I now? I'm 58. I'll be 59 later on this year in about 4 months from now. This isn't the kind of aging I'm interested in. This is the kind of aging I'm interested in. I'm interested in the kind of aging where you can continue doing the things that you like to do. Like I like to do triathlons. I like to do ultra marathon runs. I'm training for one that's going to happen in 2 months in Italy. I'm running across Tuscany. It's called the Tuscany Crossing. And I want to be able to do that as a late 50s person. I want to be able to do it as a late 60s person. I want to be able to do it as a late 70s person. I want to be that old guy that people point to and go, "Oh my gosh, look at what that guy's doing," right? I want to be able to maintain my lifestyle, as within reason, but that's the kind of stuff that I want to be able to do, and I think everybody should want to do that and not just accept a decline as inevitable as we age, right? So before we go any further, let's talk about what is aging in the first place. How do we even define that? So there are university departments of that study aging. Sometimes they study geriatrics, which is the study of aging. Sometimes they study you know what do I want to say, like nursing home bound people and compare them to people who are, what we call free living. There's all kinds of ways to describe aging. Remember, I'm a biochemist, so I want to bring it back to the biochemical signals, right? Well, what's changing? Is it stress hormones? Is it gender specific hormones like estrogen, testosterone? Is it bacteria in the gut like the microbiome? From that perspective, we think of aging as the accumulation of wear and tear induced by stress. And stress is a big, big part of the aging process. Again, aging isn't good or bad. It's just, are you going in the right trajectory? Stress is also not good or bad. We've got entire deep dives about the stress process and about the stress response process. When we think about successful aging, it's about the balance between getting enough stress but not too much stress. So let's unpack stress just a little bit. Okay, when I talk about stress, and I've written some of the best-selling books about stress and stress physiology and stress hormones like cortisol, I think of stress from multiple perspectives. When most people think about stress, you're thinking only of psychological stress, right? You're thinking about like being stressed. You're thinking about like, you know, feeling stressed out from a traffic jam or an encounter that you just had with somebody and you had an argument or um, you know your the stress of finances or stress of all the political mumbo jumbo that's happening in the world right now, right? That's a big source of stress, but we also have to think of stress from the perspective of sleep deprivation is a very unique type of stress. We've done deep dives on sleep, not getting enough sleep is a very potent and very particular kind of stress on the body, on the mind, on the microbiome. So that's different than just garden variety psychological stress that we encounter in the world. But there's also environmental stress. What's the air that you're breathing? What's the water that you're drinking? What's the sunlight exposure that you have? Are you breathing, toxic fumes from car exhaust and, things like that? There's physical stress like exercise, for example, right? Exercise is a stress on your body. I went cross country skiing today for an hour and a half, hour and 45 minutes. That's a stress on my body. And I can feel it now in my legs and in my arms. But that's a good stress, what we would call a EU stress, versus a distress, which is a stress that breaks us down. So, exercise can be considered a positive stress or sometimes a negative stress if you're an athlete who's overtrained. And then there's social stressors. One of the ones that we talk about a lot in the course that I teach is loneliness stress, right? Social connections are really, really important for our overall mental fitness, our overall well-being. Social connections are also important for what our microbiome is doing. I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole right now, but just suffice to say that there are different types of stress and they all impact us differently. Back in the days when I was a sport nutritionist, we would talk to our athletes at the Olympic training centers, and a lot of times these, these are young people, right? So they might be students. A lot of times university and high school students are coming to the training centers to like go to that next level of performance. So they're getting training and education and dietary advice and all that kind of stuff. So they might be students. So they have the stress of being students. They have the stress of being young people and trying to figure out, what they want to be when they grow up, that kind of stuff, besides an Olympic athlete. They have the stress of finances, right? A lot of these kids are, and I say kids now, but a lot of these people are they're doing their sport, they're doing their schooling. Some of them have jobs on the side to pay for everything. So all of those are accumulated kinds of stress. They might have relationship stress. They might have the stress of like worrying about like a lot of the kids would come into the Olympic training centers and they would have this imposter syndrome, like, am I really good enough to be here? And that person's a lot better than me, and I'll never be able to live up. And like, there's all this kind of stuff that's going on. And so you have to take into account all those different kinds of stress. But remember, coming back to the biochemistry of it, I like to go and see what are the underlying biochemical underpinnings of those stressors that are out there in the world. I say this to people all the time. You might not necessarily be able to control the stress that's out there in the world, but you absolutely can control, at least to some degree, the stress that happens in here, meaning in your biochemistry. So we can look at things like stress hormones like cortisol. We can look at blood sugar that can lead to something called glycation, which is a biochemical stress on your cells. We can look at cytokines, which are a type of inflammatory stress, free radicals, which lead to oxidative stress, viruses and bacteria, and your immune system. This is something we will talk about tonight. Um, Immune stress. And we can talk about how the stress makes us feel. Like, is that cortisol interfering with our serotonin, and is that making us sad, for example, right? So those, if we can, again, if we can figure out what's going on with this biochemistry, then we know enough about that biochemistry where we can go in and modulate it. We can modulate your blood sugar levels with, this intervention or that intervention. We can modulate what your immune system is doing and prime it up or down in order to get you, not just good immune system function, but good psychological function and good recovery and good performance because of that. And we can even go one level down from that and start looking at some of the enzymes and some of the regulatory systems that govern, are you producing cortisol and are you inactivating it, or is your body reactivating it? Are you producing free radicals, and can you properly quench those so that they're not causing oxidative damage? So we can look at enzyme systems like the NRF2 pathway, which is involved in oxidation, the NF-kappa B pathway that's involved in inflammation, all these anti-aging pathways that are involved in different aspects of metabolism. We can look at one that's like one of my favorites to look at. It's called the autophagy pathway. This HSP stands for heat shock proteins. We can actually naturally increase the production of those so that your body performs autophagy more efficiently. And autophagy is basically the cellular process whereby they clean themselves. And so if you can amplify that process of autophagy, you break down proteins that are non-functional, you get rid of damaged things, and you build up better, more functional, more efficient systems. So it's like taking your body in for a metabolic tune-up at the cellular level. And there's things that we can do to amplify our autophagy. So there's all kinds of really cool things we can do to change our body's stress response at the cellular level, at the hormonal level, and at the whole systems level. Okay. And a lot of it comes back to this. Let me move my image out of the way here. It comes back to this. It comes back to what's happening at the level of the gut. So here's a healthy gut. And I won't spend too much time on this slide. It's a little bit complicated. But if you're interested in this idea of healthy gut versus a senescent gut or an aging gut or a leaky gut, we have a deep dive that is just about leaky gut and how that impacts your immune system and your inflammatory profile, and how leaky gut actually is at the root cause of a lot of things that you might typically recognize as chronic fatigue syndrome and fibromyalgia and long COVID syndrome and things like that. It comes back to this idea of a leaky gut. Well, your gut can get leaky just because you're getting older, or if you're doing unsuccessful aging. One of the things that causes unsuccessful aging is leaky gut. And one of the things that leaky gut can lead to is unsuccessful aging. So it's one of those very vicious cycles that once you get leaky gut, it can accelerate the aging process, because once this gut lining becomes leaky, then it sends signals into your immune system that leads to inflammation, or what sometimes we call inflammaging, right? So you have chronic low-grade inflammation that leads to tissue damage, not just in the gut, but that inflammatory cascade will go out to every tissue in the body. So it might start in the gut, but then it permeates out, and then other tissues can start aging more in a more accelerated fashion. So here you can see the gut gets leaky. Things that are supposed to stay in the gut leak into the systemic circulation. That's the leaky gut sort of a thing. This leads to something that's called endotoxemia, where the toxins that leak out of the gut into the bloodstream set off that immune system reaction. And this has been repeated in trials over and over and over again. So it's almost like a connect the dots sort of a thing. We know about it, like we know the trajectory of what happens. The gut becomes leaky, endotoxemia happens. That endotoxemia leads to an immune system reaction. That leads to more inflammation. Those inflammatory markers can start blocking the activity of your estrogen and your testosterone and your serotonin and your thyroid hormone and et cetera, et cetera. And that leads you to feel awful. It leads to accelerated aging. And so the solution there, I mean, I'll say it in a very sort of simplistic way, is to make sure we don't have leaky gut. If we can tighten up those junctions, if we can make sure we have a good solid mucus lining, if we can make sure that we have a good diverse resilient microbiome, that improves the barrier integrity of the gut. So I said it in a very easy way, easier said than done. But there are some steps that we'll talk about in just a few minutes where you can go in and you can say step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, step 5, and it's all coming back to this idea of improving that gut barrier integrity, because it's working on your microbiome or your mucus lining or your gut lining or your inflammatory balance or your immune system vigilance, right? So like it can get very in the weeds if we want it to, but the practical recommendations when you step back and look at it from in a systemic way are actually pretty doable types of things. Okay. And the problem with all of this cascading biochemistry is that it eventually gets to some place where it causes a tissue to break down faster than it should. And so in this graphic, we're showing the brain. This is going to lead to not only inadequate function of the brain, meaning you have brain fog and you can't focus and you can't stay on task and you have monkey mind and you can't relax. And so you get that sort of spinning wheel of, when you're trying to go to sleep. That's a functional impairment. But you eventually have a structural impairment where those neurons actually start to break down, and that leads to real problems like dementia and Alzheimer's and some of the cognitive deficits that we see as we get older and older. Okay, we can look at it another way too. So we can look at a leaky gut like this. So here's your same thing that I was just describing on the last slide, just shown in a little bit different way. Your microbiome becomes dysbiotic, and I'll say this again very simply for effect. A dysbiotic or an out of balance microbiome is going to be too few of the good bacteria and too many of the bad bacteria. And those, the reason we call them good bacteria and bad bacteria is that the good guys that you're losing are the ones that produce the serotonins and dopamines and all the good signals that we want. And so if we have less of those bacteria, we're going to have less of those good signals. So you're going to feel less good. But at the same time, through the aging process that leads to this leaky gut, you're seeing bad bacteria going up. And the reason we call them bad bacteria is because they are producing compounds that make us feel bad. And generally, they're producing more inflammatory compounds like cytokines. Those inflammatory cytokines are going to impair, just like cortisol can block your, for example, serotonin, so you're not feeling as happy as you should. Inflammatory cytokines can do the exact same thing. And what you end up seeing in a lot of people is that you don't have one or the other. You have elevated cortisol, stress hormone, and you have elevated inflammatory cytokines. So it's a double whammy that now your happy signals, so to speak, can't get to where they need to get. So you've got a bad signal that is blocking a good signal, and that is a double whammy of you that leads you to feel not the way you want to feel. So here's your microbiome becoming dysbiotic. Here's your leaky gut. Things are leaking through into your systemic circulation, setting off an immune system reaction. These are immune system cells. The way the immune system responds is with inflammatory compounds, these cytokines. That's how a lot of your immune system cells kill the invading pathogen. But it's not an invading pathogen here. It's just something that is in the wrong place at the wrong time, and yet it's leading to this chronic low-grade inflammation, or what we call inflammaging, like I said a few minutes ago. And here's where that vicious cycle um, uh, becomes very vicious. That inflammation leads to tissue damage. That tissue damage leads to more immune system dysfunction, and cycle, cycle, cycle. So we have to short circuit that right here. And the way to do that is by tightening up these junctions, making sure that we have the right balance of those good bacteria and bad bacteria. So the thing that I think is, I did a podcast earlier today, and the interviewer said to me, what is the big innovation in your world, like in your scientific world? What is the big innovation that everybody is working on? And I told him it was leaky gut. It was this idea that your gut is a second brain, and anything that happens in this second brain eventually gets to the first brain. And so one of the things that I said to him was, if you have a leaky gut, and I explained what leaky gut was, just like I explained it to you guys just now, if you have a leaky gut, you probably have a leaky brain at the same time, because this lining, this one cell thick lining of your gut is very similar to what you might know as the blood-brain barrier, the lining that separates your brain, your cerebrum from the rest of your body. And so the exact same thing is happening here. And so if this is happening because of stress or poor diet or sleep deprivation or physical inactivity or any of the things that I said before, you have a leaky gut, those same biochemicals are going to be in your systemic circulation, and they're going to have the same effect on that barrier. And so now your brain becomes leaky. And that's what's leading to impairments in your memory, impairments in your focus, impairments in all of that, functional impairment, and then a structural impairment, right? So neuroinflammation, inflammation in the brain. And that is one of the hallmarks that leads people to depression and anxiety and just feeling blah all the time. Okay. So with that, I've written about this in my most recent book. So I showed you a picture of the Wild Medicine book that's coming out later, either end of this year or beginning of next year. This is my most recent one that's out right now, called Mental Fitness. And it really unpacks this idea of what happens in the gut as the second brain informs what is happening in your head, the first brain. I also talk a lot. I have a whole chapter in there about the heart, which is what we call the third brain. I'm not going to talk about that tonight, but we talk about mental fitness, talk about cognition, talk about immune vigilance, which is a really important part of the axis when we talk about gut-brain axis. Talk about metabolism, and we talk about epigenetics and aging. And so aging is what we're really going to focus on for the rest of the time that we have tonight. And this is an area where it has grown by leaps and bounds in just the last decade. I've been around long enough where I remember all the anti-aging people, and they called themselves anti-aging people back then. It was all about antioxidants. And if you could just solve the antioxidant problem, right? Free radicals versus antioxidants. If you could solve that problem, you would stop aging in its tracks. And so there was a period of time in the, 80s where antioxidants were all the rage. And what we found in those days was, okay, let's supplement people with lots of vitamin E and lots of vitamin C and lots of selenium and lots of resveratrol and those sorts of things. And what we found was oops, sorry, we made a mistake. Um, it's a very standard inverted U-shaped curve, right? So if you have too few antioxidants, that's definitely going to be a bad thing, right? So you want to make sure you're not deficient in vitamin C and not deficient in vitamin E or beta carotene or polyphenols or any of that kind of stuff. You need enough of those. And you can get a little bit more, a little bit more, a little more protection, a little more protection. And then eventually you reach a tipping point where now, if you start taking more of those kinds of things, mega dosing in your antioxidants, you'll actually start causing oxidation. You start causing problems in the body. So that was the oops moment because people were out there mega dosing with 10,000% of the daily recommended value for vitamin E and zinc and selenium and all that kind of stuff, and actually causing more aging, accelerating the aging process. So, there was that time in the dark ages, 1980s. It moved from that to the big thing that was driving the aging process being inflammation. And so the idea was inflammation is at the root cause of all these diseases that are associated with the aging process. And so, okay, great. It's inflammation now. Let's squash inflammation as much as possible. And there's drugs that do that. There's over-the-counter things that do that. And what we've found is that if you push inflammation too low, it actually impairs your cell's ability to rebuild themselves. And so again, it's a Goldilocks situation. You don't want inflammation to be too high. That's bad. You also don't want inflammation to be too low. So you probably see where this is going. The next wave of, innovation or eureka moments was around blood sugar control. And we had this whole period of time where, we didn't want our blood sugar levels to ever rise because that was going to cause glycation. It was going to cause, all these problems in the body where the cells were going to get basically frosted, and so then they wouldn't function well. Right. And again, what we found was if you push blood sugar levels too low, that can lead to problems with how the brain works and how the muscles work and how your body metabolizes not just sugar but fat and how it stores energy. And so it became another one of these balance kinds of an idea, right? And that's exactly where we are right now. So we want to maintain oxidation, we want to maintain inflammation, we want to maintain glycation. Cortisol, when I started writing my cortisol books 20 years ago, it was the same sort of a thing where everybody started saying, well, cortisol is bad and cortisol is toxic. We want to get it as low as possible. No, no, no. What I wrote in my very first cortisol book was you want to maintain a rhythm. You want to have high cortisol sometimes, like in the morning. You want to have low cortisol at other times, as like in the evening. And if you can maintain that rhythm, maintain that balance, that is where you're going to have good stress resilience. So now we start talking about the microbiome, and it's the same kind of an idea. We have people who are getting excited about the microbiome and saying, what we need is a lot more probiotics so you get the good bacteria, and we want to try to get rid of all the bacteria, all the bad bacteria. No. If you heard what I said just a few minutes ago, it's about maintaining the balance, maintaining the diversity of good guys and bad guys. You want to have more good guys than bad guys, but you don't want to have only good guys and no bad guys. Those when I say bad guys, they're not really bad. They're the reason that they're okay is that they will take up space that would push out other really bad guys like salmonellas and E. coli's and things like that that could really, really make you sick. So, you want to have a balance of these. And as we go through here, you're going to get a perspective for maintaining that balance, or AKA maintaining that diversity is really the thing that we underline, highlight, and put exclamation points next to. Maintaining diversity seems to be the thing that really drives the aging process, or drives it in the right direction, right? Drives it towards that successful aging. And there's lots and lots of studies that show that. So this one came out just a couple of days ago. This is an article written in a magazine, online magazine called The Conversation. What they do in this magazine is they'll have scientists write an article about a scientific topic, but write it for a non-scientific audience. And so this one is talking about your gut microbes can be anti-aging. Scientists are uncovering how to keep your microbiome youthful. And so you'll see, you'll see my recommendations at the end of how you can do that. And so this article went into some of the really cool studies showing that the groups of older people who can maintain that young microbiome do so much better. They have less Alzheimer's, they have less cancer, they have less sarcopenia, they have less osteoporosis. They just, they might be 100 years old, but they're functioning like a healthy 80-year-old or 70-year-old or 60-year-old, right? They are much younger than their years would suggest. So there's that, and here's the link to the actual article if you want to read the whole thing. And there's just study after study after study that show this kind of thing. So here's the aging gut microbiome and its impact on host immunity. If we can keep the microbiome young, we can also keep the immune system young, and that means your immune system is going to be stronger, so you're less susceptible to the next pandemic that comes, rearing its head. And there will be another one. And, whether you're a vaccine person or an anti-vaccine person, the thing that we can agree on is that we want to make sure we have a strong immune system, a balanced, or what I call primed immune system. And the best way to do that is to make sure you have a strong microbiome and good gut integrity. Here's a study from the National Institute of Aging talking about unique gut microbiome patterns linked to healthy aging and increased longevity. Here's a study from a very high tier scientific publication called Nature Aging. Young microbiota rejuvenates the aging brain. Here's a study in another high ticket a journal called Nature Metabolism. You're going to see another one of these studies in just a second. Gut microbiome pattern reflects healthy aging and predicts survival in humans. Um, and here's one that just came out a couple of days ago. So I'm recording this on March 4th. This came out yesterday in a journal called Nature Reviews Endocrinology, one of the top hormone scientific journals out there. The gut microbiome and aging trajectories, mechanisms and clinical implications. And so this is a review article. You can see right here. This is a review article. So what they did was they looked back over the last few years and they summarized all the studies they could find that looked at the link between the gut microbiome and the aging process. And I pulled out from the article just a few key points that I want to share with you. So here's the first one. Aging is associated with a reconfiguration of gut microbial communities towards dysbiosis. So that's one of the cartoons that I showed you at the beginning of this masterclass, that as we age, if our gut microbiome becomes dysbiotic, remember what that means. Your good bacteria are going down and your bad bacteria are going up. That balance between them is shifting. That's what we mean by dysbiosis. That's associated with unsuccessful aging or accelerated aging, if you want to say it that way. So we don't want that to happen, right? We know that leads to aging when your microbiome changes in that way. Gut microbiome reconfiguration during aging is influenced by gastrointestinal cell senescence. That was that senescent gut that I showed you that leads to leaky gut. As the gut cells age and the entire gut environment gets older, so to speak, that provides antigenic stimulation to the senescent immune system. That's the immune system reacting. And remember, the immune system reacts by causing inflammation, fueling inflammaging, and favoring trajectories towards the frailty syndrome. This key point says the gut microbiome of centenarians, remember 100 years and older, shows an exceptional capacity of adaptation to the pathophysiological processes leading to inflammaging with persistence of a set of bacterial taxa and with anti-inflammatory properties. What this means in real language is that the centenarians have an ability to keep their microbiome from changing towards dysbiosis. And it's not that they're not doing anything to their microbiome. Their microbiome has that resiliency so that it is not becoming dysbiotic. And because it's not becoming dysbiotic, it's not activating the immune system. And because it's not activating the immune system, it's not leading to that inflammation or inflammaging, and therefore they don't have that accelerated aging. So it all comes back. Those centenarians are aging well because they're less inflamed, because they're less immune activated, because their gut is in a better position, right? Their microbiome was able to stay young. It was able to maintain its balanced situation, and therefore the organism, the person benefited from that with a slower or a more successful aging pattern. And then this is the thing that, like, all of that is really interesting. All of that, for me as a scientist, makes me geek out about the mechanisms and how we connect the dots and what's going on here and all that kind of stuff. But the bottom line is this: modulation of the where's my cursor? Modulation of the gut microbiome with diet, exercise, and nutritional supplements containing probiotics, prebiotics, and food bioactives could represent an effective strategy to improve the aging trajectory in older individuals. So that one, if you're a scientist, right, who's watching this right now, or a health professional, or anyone who is just interested in science and details and data, for authors to put this kind of a statement in a journal article that was published in a journal like Nature Reviews Endocrinology, it has to be pretty damn solid, right? To say that we can make these positive changes in the microbiome and in the aging process itself with diet, exercise, and nutritional supplements like probiotics, prebiotics, etc. That's There has to be some really darn good data for them to be able to make a statement like that. And there is, right? And if you've ever tuned into any of my stuff, you know that these are the kinds of things that we try to focus on. Okay, so let me give you a couple of examples of the things that we really need to focus in on. It's not just that we want a better microbiome, right? We do, but there's things that we can focus in on that are the really important triggers or really important signals that we want to get out of the microbiome. A lot of times in my class, I will talk to my students and say, there's one aspect of your microbiome structure, like who is there? What are the bacteria that are there? That's the idea of good bacteria versus bad bacteria. There's also an aspect of what is your microbiome function. So of the bacteria that are there, are they producing short chain fatty acids? Are they like butyrate? Are they producing GABA to help you with stress resilience? Are they producing inflammatory markers, which is what we would not want, right? So that's a functional kind of an idea. When we look at it from that perspective, we can look at things like this. So this is showing you a graph of all the bacteria that are GABA producers. So in your microbiome, there are trillions of bacteria, and there are thousands of different species of bacteria. Some of them will produce GABA, some of them will produce serotonin, some of them will produce butyrate, some of them will produce, compound X, which does nothing for you, but compound X is maybe used by another bacteria that makes GABA. Right. So like there's this constant interplay between who's producing what, who's using what the balance of all that looks like. So this is a slide from a biotech company that has screened all the bacteria in the microbiome for their ability to make GABA. So there's some bacteria that can do it. There's some bacteria that can't do it. There's some bacteria that can do it, but do it better than other bacteria. And so they can grade them and they can go, oh, these ones are really good GABA producers. These ones have the ability to do it, but they're not really good at it. They can do it if they have to, but they're not great. Why is this important? Because if we can identify the bacteria that are good GABA producers, we can amplify their metabolism. We could use a nutrient or a dietary pattern or a lifestyle intervention to get those good GABA producers to make more, right? To do more of what they're good at. or we could look at these ones that have the ability to make GABA but aren't doing it particularly well. We could improve their ability to do that. Why is that important? Because this class of bacteria called Bacteroides are the ones that they were looking at. If we can get them to produce more GABA, we can that can help us modulate stress. It can improve our metabolism. It can improve our mood. It can improve our sleep quality. It can help people with irritable bowel syndrome. So if you had a drug that did that, that helped the microbiome make more GABA on demand when your body needed it, that would be a bigger blockbuster drug than all the GLP-1s that are out there right now, right? That's the current blockbuster in the world right now. GLP-1 drugs like Ozempic and Mounjaro and et cetera to help people lose weight. If you could get a drug that did this, it would be even bigger than that because think of how there's a lot of people who need to lose weight, people with obesity, people with diabetes, but think about how many people need to get better sleep or who have a lot of stress in their lives or who need to balance their metabolism. It's millions and millions of people. That would be an absolute blockbuster drug, and biotech companies are working on that right now. The good news is that we can do a lot of this naturally through nutrition. And I'm going to give you my top five recommendations in just a minute. Here's another slide from a different biotech company, and this is looking at short chain fatty acids. And one of the key short chain fatty acids is something called butyrate. Butyrate is really, really important. And what this chart is looking at is it's looking at mice at 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, and showing that as you age, or as these mice age, they become less and less efficient at making butyrate. So as we age, we're making less butyrate, less short chain fatty acids in general. Um, and so if we know that, right, if we know this is something that happens during the aging process, could we go into the microbiome and change the production of short chain fatty acids so that we get more of a youthful production? Because with aging and stress, the gut microbiome is altered, short chain fatty acid production is decreased, and mental and physical performance is impaired. If you could go into the microbiome and give something that amplified the production of short chain fatty acids, that also would be a blockbuster drug because then you'd have a benefit on mental and physical performance. You'd have a benefit on blood sugar control. You'd have a benefit on the immune system. It'd be another one of these blockbusters. And so that's sort of where the biotech world is right now. And the pharmaceutical industry is going to follow, probably by buying a lot of these biotech companies and bringing those technologies in that they can develop a drug around. But why wait for a drug that's 10 or 20 years down the road? Why not do that right now? We already have really good evidence to show that we can use the right probiotic strains, the right structures of prebiotic fibers, the right kinds of plant extracts, what I call phytobiotics, to change all this signaling. We can do it right now. We can change our gut, change our brain, change our body, change our future, meaning change the trajectory of our aging process because we're able to modulate and manipulate what's happening at the level of the microbiome. Here's how we can measure that. So when we measure the aging process, we can measure gut diversity, right? Like I was talking about before. Here's your gut microbiome diversity. Here's your biological age. As your biological age gets greater or older, your gut diversity goes down. So we can, with some level of specificity or accuracy, take a microbiome sample from somebody and measure the diversity of that microbiome sample. And with reasonable accuracy, we can tell you what your biological age is. And that may or may not match with your chronological age, right? So I'm 58. My biological age is more like 50, right? So I'm doing a pretty good job on that. We can get a perspective of that from your microbiome diversity. We can also look at so that's looking at diversity is looking at the collection of your whole microbiome. We can also drill down and we can look at different specific types of bacteria. So in those centenarians, right, the successful agers, we're seeing a lot of this particular bacteria called Akkermansia. Akkermansia, if you have a high level of it, it suggests that you have a good mucus lining, which is an indicator for good gut integrity. So people with lots of akkermansia don't have leaky gut. If we measure you and we can't detect akkermansia, or we detect a low level of akkermansia, it's almost 100% guaranteed that you have leaky gut and you have immune system activation and you have inflammaging, just because we're looking at this one bacteria. So one way to have an anti-aging effect is to get more akkermansia, and we can easily supplement people with this. We can use an akkermansia probiotic, we can use an akkermansia postbiotic to accomplish the same thing. In people who are frail, we see more of this kind of bacteria, Campylobacter. This is associated with inflammation. And so, you see how that links. An inflammatory bacteria leads to an inflammatory state in the body, leads to the body not being able to repair itself, leads to more breakdown, more problems, et cetera, et cetera. So you can look at the whole microbiome, you can look at specific pieces of the microbiome. We can also look at the functional aspect of the microbiome. Remember, I said there's an aspect of who's there and an aspect of what they're doing. We can look at different, metabolomic pathways. We can look at short chain fatty acid productions. This is one of the things that I don't do a lot of measurements in the work that I do, like lab work and things like that. But this is one that I do like to look at from time to time in the people that I work with. Short chain fatty acid production, for the reasons that I said before. One of the short chain fatty acids is butyrate that you saw on the previous slide, but you can also look at amino acids, you can look at methane, you can look at vitamin B, you can look at a whole bunch of different things. Is the microbiome producing what you want it to produce, or is it not producing the bad stuff? And then finally, you can look at some different kinds of metabolites. You can look at things like indoles, which are anti-inflammatory compounds that tend to be higher in people who are successfully aging. You can look at other kinds of inflammatory acids that are higher in people who have obesity and diabetes and chronic disease kinds of things. So there's all kinds of ways that we can measure this, but all of it traces back to what is the microbiome doing? Okay. So let me ask you this question. I'm gonna take a drink of water real quick. So, this is all um uh interesting, right? It's all new science. It's new science in the standpoint that we've learned most of this over the last 10 years or so. It's been repeated over and over and over again so that we know that it's all true, right? It's published in some of the top tier journals, like I just shared with you. It's done by different research groups from around the world. So we know it's a real finding that's reproduced in all these different scenarios. But there's still the question of, is the microbiome really causative in the aging process? Or is the aging process causing the body to age and the microbiome to age? And it's really just like it's a correlation. It's not really causation, right? How do we unpack that to show that they're not just happening at the same time, but the microbiome is actually linked to, are you aging well or aging poorly? And that's where some of these rodent studies get really, really interesting. So this is just one of hundreds of these studies that have been done at this point. And what you can do is something called an FMT, a fecal microbiome transplant. And what that looks like is this. You can take the microbiome from a young mouse and you can insert it into an old mouse. You basically swap their software, so to speak. And when that happens, that old mouse becomes a young mouse on every parameter that you can measure. That old mouse has a younger immune system. That old mouse has a younger brain. Their brain cells actually like de-age, in front of your eyes, basically. They have a youthful metabolism. So here you can see GABA is one of the metabolites that is looked at in these studies. They start producing more GABA, and I talked a couple slides ago about why that's a good thing for stress resilience and mental function and things like that. But then even their behavior improves. So here's an aged mouse trying to find its food. In these experiments, what you do is you move the food around the mouse housing unit, and so when they're hungry, they don't know where the food is. They have to go and try to find it. An aged mouse basically wanders all around until they find it. You can see how much how much they search for it because you have like a GPS tracker on their head. Um, and the aged mouse that has the so here's the aged mouse, but here's the aged mouse with the microbiome transplant, the aged mouse with the young microbiome. They solve this problem better. So their cognitive decline was reversed. So this is basically a dementia mouse, and this is an old mouse that has a perfectly young functioning brain again, right? So their behavior has changed. So no matter if you look at it from a behavioral perspective, a metabolic perspective, a neurological perspective, an immunological perspective, that is a young mouse. And all you did was you switched its microbiome. So that's not really available to us right now as humans, but we can maintain our microbiome. We can keep our microbiome young with a lot of really simple interventions. Just before I get into there, I want to say something, one really quick thing. A lot of times when we're aging, people think of it as just an outside thing, right? And so what ends up happening is, you're aging and you're getting wrinkles, and I've got wrinkles and I've got these crow feet and I've got these lines on my forehead and things like that. And so people, reach for skin creams, and they reach for, serums, and they start taking collagen supplements and things like that. Not that any of that is bad, right? I use a really good skin cream. I take a collagen supplement every morning in my coffee. But it's not just an outside thing, right? There's things you can do on the outside, but there's things you can do from the inside too. And I want to give you an example of that. So, there's all kinds of things you can do topically. You can, use your sunscreen and, stay away from smoke and, stay away from getting sunburns and things like that. That's all great. You can use moisturizers and skin serums and, topical peptides, which I do use there. But there's all these intrinsic factors as well. There's things that you can do from the inside, like lowering your inflammation, lowering your glycation, lowering your oxidative load, making sure that your cortisol is in the right perspective, all that kind of stuff from the inside, beauty from the inside out. One of those cool approaches is to eat fermented foods. This is going to be one of the tips that I'm going to talk about in a couple of minutes. We know that there's specific good bacteria in fermented food that can help you manage the immunological and inflammatory aspects of what causes the skin to wrinkle and become red and not heal and become inflamed and things like that. So this is just one example to show you that we can do this from the perspective of the microbiome. This is one particular bacteria, Lactobacillus sakei 65. So this is the strain designation, the 65. This is something that's isolated from Korean kimchi. This is technically it's a postbiotic, right? Because it's a heat-killed probiotic. Probiotic has to be alive to be considered a probiotic once we heat kill it, and it still retains its biological function. Then we call it a postbiotic. But this has been shown in a number of clinical trials that when we feed that particular bacteria, it has immune modulating effects. So it calms the immune system and it reduces inflammation. And it's been studied several times in something called atopic dermatitis, which is eczema. So eczema, if you've ever experienced that or had your kids, a lot of kids have it, you'll see these red patches. You'll see them on the inside of your elbow. You'll see them on the backside of your knee. You'll see them on your lower legs. They're bright red. They're scaly. They're itchy. They're painful sometimes. They don't look nice. So when you have these eczema patches, people want to cover them up and things like that. But this particular bacteria nourishes the gut-skin axis to optimize overall skin health and has been studied to help with dermatitis, eczema, hydration, etc. And there's a number of studies that have shown this. Let me move this guy over. And it's one of those effects that you can measure it. You can measure these different inflammatory scores, and you can show that the bacteria that comes from this kimchi, this L. sakei 65, lowers inflammatory markers, lowers pain scores, lowers how it looks. So here's clearer skin, so you don't see those red patches. So this is just one of many examples where we can do something in the microbiome and you can see an effect in the tissue. And the reason that I picked this one is because you can see the effect, right? You can see the effect on your skin. You're not necessarily seeing the effect in your adrenal glands or seeing the effect in your neurons in your brain. Those are things you're more likely to feel, but this is a very visual example. So that's why I wanted to share that one. Okay, before I get to my recommendations, let me say one quick word about peptides. This is the biggest hype thing out there right now. And I don't mean hype in a bad way, necessarily. Um, I have a whole deep dive on peptides. Um, and what I like to discuss when I'm talking about peptides is that your body already makes hundreds, thousands probably different peptides. I use GLP-1, GLP-1 as an example. We naturally make that in our guts, and there are things that we can do naturally. There's things that we can eat, different fibers, different amino acids, different fatty acids that can increase our production of GLP-1. Not to the same degree that you're going to get with an Ozempic shot, but suffice to say, there's things you can do naturally if you don't want to do the synthetic. If you're interested in this whole area of peptides, go and find that on my YouTube channel or in the coaching community, and go do a deep dive in there if you want to. But buyer beware. 99% of the peptides that are on the market right now as anti-aging peptides are coming from nondescript, unknown Chinese laboratories. None of them are FDA approved. None of them are studied in human clinical trials. They are all research chemicals. And so it is very much buyer beware. It's literally flip a coin to know or to guess of if the peptide that you just ordered off of TikTok, did it come from a reputable lab? Is it free of contaminants? Is it at the right strength? Is it even the peptide that you think it is, right? Is it BPC 157 or is it sawdust? Like there's no clear way to know. So it is very much a buyer beware market. That doesn't make it good or bad. That doesn't speak to is it effective or not effective. But it is just do your homework before you get into this peptide world, right? So I dive into the details of it in that deep dive. So check that out. Okay, so before we get into these last couple of tips, I just want to remind you, if you want more information about any of this kind of stuff, you see what we're doing at Three Waves, go check out threewaveswellness.com. You can see our products, you can see our affiliate program, you can see all the educational programs that we have. We're a startup star, 2026 for a reason. I think we're doing a lot of really cool stuff, and I would love for you to check out and even join some of the things that we're doing. Okay, so what are my big recommendations? So you saw this one coming, right? The first one, the most important one, is feed your microbes like a garden. You want to make sure you maintain that diversity. And the best way to do that is to feed a diversity of fibers to your microbiome. The best way to do that is to try to get as many, not just, it says here, aim for 30 to 40 grams of fiber per day. Yes, the amount of fiber matters, but even more than that, it's the diversity of the fiber. Meaning, of that 30 grams, let's say, that you're trying to get every day, you want to make sure you're getting multiple types of fiber, not just wheat bran, not just oat bran, not just fiber from Metamucil, not just fiber from, one or two sources, as many as possible. And that's one of the reasons that I recommend with my students all the time to do something called a 30 plant challenge with them, with their clients, to try to get people to eat a diversity of different fruits and vegetables. So 30 fruits and vegetables in a 1 week, in a 7-day period. Spices count, phytonutrients count, supplements, if they're properly formulated, count. We have this Zenith is really high in polyphenols, which count as a serving, so to speak. And the reason for that is that the more diverse fiber intake you have, the fiber is the food for your microbiome, and that's going to result in a diversity of your microbiome. And remember, diversity is the thing that pregnant moms want, that postmenopausal women want, that aging anybody wants, right? We want more diversity, and the best way to get it is a diversity in your diet, diversity of fiber in your diet. Okay. So there's that one. Add fermented foods, right? So my three F's: fiber, fermented foods, and flavonoids. We're going to talk about phytonutrients in just a second. Add fermented foods. It doesn't have to be that Lactobacillus sacchi from kimchi, but certainly get some kimchi, get some sauerkraut, get some yogurt, get some kombucha, get any of those fermented foods, because fermented foods are going to change your microbiome in a positive direction in a different way than what fiber is going to do. So it's not like fiber is more important than fermented foods or fermented foods is more important than fiber. They're both important in different ways to help maintain that microbiome diversity. Okay? Regular fermented food intake increases microbiome diversity and lowers inflammatory markers, both hallmarks of healthier aging. Okay, number three, strengthen the gut barrier. So we talked in some length about leaky gut. Make sure you don't get leaky gut. And the way to maintain that strong gut barrier, or gut barrier integrity is the way that we talk about it scientifically, is to make sure you have a diverse microbiome. We just solved that. Make sure you have a good environment in your gut, so your gut isn't overinflamed or underinflamed or over acidic or under acidic, right? That environment is really important. That's one of the things that fermented foods does. And then eating these kinds of foods, polyphenols are also known as, some polyphenols are known as flavonoids. That's the third F that I sort of led off with tonight. Omega-3s, polyphenols, amino acids like glutamine, sleep and circadian rhythm stability, all of these things, when they're out of balance, or when we're deficient in them, or our intake is not optimal, we know that leads to leaky gut. So having more of these can maintain that barrier so that we don't develop leaky gut. Okay, so we talked about that in enough detail. Move your body. This one might not make sense to you, right? Because it's not something we're eating, right? It's not something we're delivering right to our microbiome. But your microbiome knows if you're moving or if you're not moving. There are really good studies that show that we can take a microbiome sample and we can tell you how old you are. We can take a microbiome sample and with some level of precision, we can look at that and go, ah, you're a couch potato, or oh, you're a recreational exerciser, or oh, you're an elite level athlete, right? Because that level of physical activity changes the microbiome because of a variety of different outcomes, but one of which is related to butyrate production, right? We talked about short chain fatty acids and butyrate. Regular physical activity increases microbial diversity and butyrate producing bacteria. So you can actually grade people and you can see that the more fit you get, the more butyrate you have. And maybe the more butyrate you have, the easier it is to gain fitness in your exercise programs. This is something I'm actually really interested in. I'll just mention it really quickly, that we might be able to supplement people with butyrate to help accelerate their fitness gains when they're on an exercise program. What it won't do is allow you to eat the butyrate or make more butyrate from your gut and not exercise, right? You're not going to get the same benefits. But what we think is happening is you can take two groups of people doing the same exercise regimen and supplement one group with butyrate, or supplement them with something that increases their natural production of butyrate, and they get more benefits out of the exercise program. They gain more strength, they gain more muscle mass, they gain more endurance, they get more VO2 max, they get more traction in their exercise regimen if they have more butyrate on board. And so that's a virtuous cycle, the exact opposite of the vicious cycle that a lot of times we see ourselves getting into, with leaky gut leading to inflammatory overload, and that inflammatory overload leading to more leaky gut. That's vicious cycle. We can maybe flip that into a virtuous cycle with amplifying these productions of short chain fatty acids. And then number 5 is manage stress to protect the gut brain axis. So talked about stress in some detail. We talked about the importance of or the unique stress that sleep deprivation is going to be on the body. So, you can short circuit your stress very easily with these daily nervous system resets like breath work and meditation and spending time outdoors and social connection, which I talked about a little bit tonight. Um, Adequate sleep is very, very important because of the unique nature of sleep stress. So think of these little resets as fertilizer for your microbes to keep them all in balance. And I'm going to give you one bonus one, right? I said I would give you my top five. Here's my number six, and it involves our Zenith supplement, right? I am a food first nutritionist. I am an exercise first physiologist, right? I want people to be getting their sleep and eating their 30 plant challenge and their Mediterranean diet and doing all the things that you're supposed to do and you've heard a billion times before. But I'm also a realist, and I know that life gets in the way of that kind of stuff all the time, right? I'm a professional nutritionist, for God's sake, and I can't even eat a perfect diet all the time. So that's where a supplement like this, a multibiotic that has probiotics, the right strains of probiotic bacteria, and prebiotic fibers that help to amplify the production of those neurotransmitters, and postbiotics and phytobiotics, all with really good research on them, all branded ingredients that have decades of research on them to bring to bear on this problem of, what? Sometimes our diet's going to be off. Sometimes our physical activity program is going to be off. Sometimes our sleep hygiene is going to be off. Sometimes we're going to have more stress or less stress. So a supplement is that nutritional infrastructure. It's that dietary insurance to just, drop in there, make sure you're having good focus. Drop in there, make sure you're having good resilience. So, when the what hits the fan, you're able to step in there with good resilience and solve the problem and come up with creative solutions and get the job done. So, that's something that is targeted microbiome nutrition that can really help close those gaps. Because at the end of the day, this is what we're trying to do, right? It's awesome for us to talk about the microbiome, and it's awesome to talk about the gut-brain axis signaling and immune system vigilance and, senescent guts and microbiome transplants in rodents and all that kind of stuff is fun and interesting to talk about. But at the end of the day, this is what we care about. We care about helping people level up. We help people who might feel kind of tired and wired and stressed out and blah. And we want to get them to have good motivation and good resilience and be ready to, level themselves up no matter what life serves up in any given moment. And so that's what we're doing here at Three Waves, and hopefully you're interested in that. Maybe you'll check us out. Maybe you'll share this, on the replay. You'll share this with your network and get people to think about the importance of, keeping their gut-brain axis in balance for, life stages of pregnancy or a menopause or the whole aging process. Because you know what? We're all in this together, right? We're all aging, and hopefully we can all age in a successful way together and be around to have a lot of life in our years. Okay. Thanks for joining me tonight, you guys. I'll see you next time. Bye bye.